Okay, so this morning I am actually pretty excited to talk about what I want to talk about today. One of the things that I really enjoy with people is trying to figure them out. I'm the kind of guy that I think this comes from me just kind of feeling like I do a lot of things wrong. Sorry, my car is squealing in the background. So I think it comes from living a life of kind of feeling like I'm not getting things right. And so I have this weird thing where I try to figure other people out, and it leads to a lot of pretty deep and honest conversations with other people. So yesterday, we'll just call this guy Steve, but I was talking to a guy, Steve, at work that I would say that I have a pretty good relationship with. He doesn't work directly with me. He works for another vendor contractor that comes on site about once a week. So anyway, I was talking to Steve, and Steve and I are both incredibly busy guys. He is an account manager for this local vendor that services us, but he's got a lot of accounts and he covers a pretty wide territory. And the poor guy, by Wednesday, you can see in his eyes that he's just exhausted. He's got a lot of accounts with a lot of unique challenges and struggles, and the poor guy is just overwhelmed. But I look at Steve and I can relate to that, and I think many of us as men can relate to that. And so, but the one thing I've always respected about Steve is that Steve has this ability to just remain patient through it all. And I really respect that about Steve, and I wondered where it came from. I've always wondered where it came from, because I've known Steve for a number of years now. And so I'm looking at Steve, and yesterday it just came out while him and I were talking, as we're working together. I just kind of told him, like, I really respect that about you, Steve, that you kind of just remain patient. And I asked him, how do you accomplish this? And, Steve, he jokingly said, well, I go home and beat my dog, which is kind of a dark joke. And of course he was kidding, right? But then, after the joke, he just said, a lot of caffeine and antidepressants. And I looked at Steve and I go, bro, you take antidepressants? And he goes, yeah, sometimes. But I have a really hard time sleeping at night because of all the stress that it keeps me awake. And I just looked at him and I go, Steve, don't you think that that's a key indicator that something is wrong with the system? Like the way things work in modern America, and I didn't say modern America, but he understood what I was driving at. Like, I think oftentimes as men, what we do is we look at ourselves, and I'm not going to pretend to say that there's not plenty wrong with me or that I don't have inefficiencies, but I can't help but look around the modern working environment for most 9-to-5 jobs, especially if you're blue collar like us, that work for these giant corporations. And I can't help but think that, yes, while I have my own inefficiencies, certainly, I think it would be incredibly arrogant for me to not admit that I am part of some problem. But I look at this system that demands so much from people, places very, very, very large burdens on people, seemingly impossible tasks, really impossible asks, that us as men have to find ways to cope. And to me, if we've got to drug ourselves up, and don't get me wrong, I drink caffeine and I consume nicotine, that just so happens to be, almost the way that I've found to cope. But Steve remains patient. And I'm like, Steve, where does that come from? And don't get me wrong, I think Steve deserves due credit, because I do think naturally that is who Steve is. But he's also getting assistance from antidepressants. And I'm just really looking at this type of environment that I've existed in over the last 14 years and really questioning the system at this point. Are we meant for this kind of burden? And I do believe that men are meant to shoulder and carry heavy burdens. But oftentimes the burdens that people like Steve and I face in these environments are very, very high expectations from people in high places with no real understanding of the issues, barking demands without any understanding of what it looks like to achieve what they want. But they just expect you to pull it off. And I asked Steve, I said, Steve, is that an indicator that there's something wrong with the system? And I think I got his wheels turning too. So all of that to be said, I'm titling this video Questioning the System. I do think that we as men bring our own inefficiencies to any environment that we're in, whether it's work, family, whatever else it might be. But I am also wondering if the way we do things in America on a corporate scale is sustainable. And given my experience over the last 14 years in the industry that I'm in, I don't believe that it is. You see a lot of these operations that operate for 24 hours. These people work a lot of times, like my own employees work 12-hour shifts. You've got people up at night. And I do just wonder if we, instead of bending kind of the natural way that we as humans are wired to meet the demands of industry, is if we shaped the way that we work on an industrial level to how we're more naturally wired as humans. Like, we're wired to sleep at night. And so for these 24-hour operations, it just seems like an inefficiency to me. I wonder what would happen is if culturally we adopted this idea of shaping the way we work around the way that we're wired as humans. I wonder if almost we would see more efficiency, more life, more productivity. But instead, oftentimes when I'm in these environments, not oftentimes, I've worked in this industry for 14 years and I've never worked a plant that operates efficiently. I've never worked one. They're always chaotic, equipment's always breaking. And so I really am just questioning the way that we run things especially in an industrial setting in America. And that's one of the main drivers behind me wanting to pursue something else, something that fits, my life better, where I don't have to cave to the demands of these giant entities that are really it's really just a giant race to the bottom. These companies spend millions of dollars on these giant inefficient systems that they think are going to solve all their problems, and it turns out that these people at these high levels don't have a good grasp of the true issues. And so oftentimes what happens is they spend millions of dollars for a system that doesn't work. And so they'll come to find out, 6 months to a year to a couple years later, they've spent money on a system that's broken. And again, I think that's what's driving me, this understanding or this questioning of how these things work. It's what's driving me to want to pursue something that fits, the way that I'm wired a little bit better. And ultimately, I think that it's sad. I think that it's sad that somebody like Steve, who I think is a great guy, who I respect a lot, I've really looked up to his patience. He's got a certain level of dignity and respect that he carries with him and he's able to handle people so well. But then I come to find out that his crutch is antidepressants. And I just question whether or not, and I'm not faulting anybody for taking antidepressants or ADHD medication. I'm somebody who's been diagnosed with severe ADHD, but instead of going the route of taking ADHD meds, I've just kind of chosen to supplement with nicotine, because nicotine helps me focus, it promotes positive mood, things like that. But again, in the same way, I don't necessarily believe that I should need this crutch. And I don't necessarily need nicotine, I'm not addicted to it. But I do recognize that, like, I'm band-aiding these things just like Steve is. So again, if you're on antidepressants, or if you take ADHD medication or anything like that, this isn't me like belittling you or anybody else. This is me questioning the system that just about seems to force us to have to do these things just to cope. And I have a real problem with it. So anyway, that's really my thoughts today. I don't really have much else to share with you other than to just ask a question. It's interesting to me, and I don't really have an answer for it. Is there something so wrong with us, or is there something wrong with the way that we do business in a modern world and in modern corporate America? Because we don't, at least in my industry, we don't really ever seem to get anywhere. We just continue to spin our wheels without really accomplishing anything. And so I question why we self-medicate like this. I question for essentially nothing to show for it. All the stress, all the labor, all the time away from family to essentially accomplish nothing. Again, with nothing to show for it. And so really, I'm just leaving an open-ended question on today's video. Is this the right way to do things? Is this sustainable? And I guess in your own life, you have to come to your own conclusion. But ultimately, why I'm doing this is because I've come to the conclusion that I can't sustain this. And I not only can I not sustain it, but I don't want to do it the rest of my life. And so, yeah, I just leave an open-ended question with you today. Are you seeing these same things? Is it sustainable for you? How do we navigate this? And I think the ways that I found to navigate is I do supplement with nicotine. But I'm also learning things like drawing boundaries and being able to tell people no, and be willing to disappoint certain people, even if that means it might get me in a little bit of trouble. Because ultimately, like, what's valuable to me is quality time with my family. And so I've kind of learned over the years to put my foot down and just be willing to tell people no. So let me know your experiences at work, in the comments. I would be interested to hear and engage with you in the comments about what your experiences are. So yeah, with all that being said, I'm going to let you go. I'm going to do this for, I think this is day 4. I'm going to do this for a full 7 days and then completely jump ship from this channel and start working on my other project. So I've got a few days left, but let me know in the comments how you feel about this, and I'd be happy to engage with you. I will talk to you guys tomorrow. Later.